Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about transit Pluto, square, opposition, or in conjunct one's natal Mars. Now, when you have transits that involve Pluto, they can be about power, control, transformation, crisis, desire, fixation, and obsession. Now, when transit Pluto is basically making an adverse aspect to natal Mars, and I'm going to elaborate on it. When I say basically adverse aspect, well, squares and oppositions, of course, those aspects are adverse and negative aspects in astrology. Now, the inconjunct aspect, well, that is neutral, but neutral aspects can have good and bad qualities in them. And the thing is, too, it's coupled also with the fact that an inconjunct can often require an adjustment or transition, and that, of course, can cause some exasperation and tension. So collectively, basically, I do see this as an adverse transit. But anyway, again, when transit Pluto is basically making an adverse aspect to one's natal Mars, well, it could manifest in power, control, transformation, crisis, desire, fixation, and obsession. These things might conflict with one's sexual drive and desire at this time. It could be where one may be dealing with a power issue or power struggle. If transit Pluto is in the 6th house, as an example, it could be at one's work or place of employment, and it might be diminishing the sexual drive, or even just matters with sex in general, just a general sex urge and interest. It could be also too where dealing with some kind of power control issues might have a negative effect on one's energy and vitality. Say if the natal Mars is in Leo, and that could be a very good place for near inexorable, indefatigable energy. But even in a placement like that, the energy might feel where it might be diminished a little bit. I believe NBA legend Michael Jordan has his Mars in Leo, so gives you an idea that Mars could really be a really powerful placement, because that's could really factor into your energy and vitality. Now, anyway, going back to transit, now Mars is also connected with our drive and motivation. And the thing is, Pluto energy can be about obsession and fixation. And I think that what's really important to remember during this transit is that you're not overly obsessed with being driven toward something, and where whether it even if it's something that's beneficial to you, it might be it could be a situation. Mars is about physical energy and physical strength, and you don't want to take on more than you can handle, because you might be obsessed with something that requires some kind of physical strength. If it's, say, if the natal Mars is in the 5th house, as an example, it could be something sports related, and you just it's a time where you just really need to be very prudent, and don't try to do too much at this time. And also could be a harder time trying to control one's anger at this time as well. Remember, Pluto is about our power and control. Mars is connected with anger and acrimony. Mars is also connected with our enthusiasm. So maybe it's harder to control our enthusiasm. It could be where you might be going a little bit overboard at this time and becoming overly enthused over something at the time of this transit. But it could also be, if you're trying to make a major change or transformation in your life, you might have difficulty finding the enthusiasm for that at this time. And the thing about this too is, now Mars is also connected with courage and fortitude. And it might be a time where it might be harder to find that if you're dealing with a crisis at this point in time. To really find, it doesn't mean you don't have any courage in you, but it might be difficult to actually get that, to have that at this point in time. And you might feel at this time as well. Mars is also Mars is connected with action, and you don't want to do something. I mean, Pluto is about control, and it might be harder to control one's actions. It could just simply be, ones that are very impulsive. I mean, if you have like, again, going back to the fifth house, it could be something with gambling. And if you are somebody that is, maybe everything but a compulsive gambler or even a reckless one, it's really important to try to have some control at this time. You don't want to go overboard, because the more you would do something like that, the greater propensity for losing at some point. And Mars is also connected with our initiative and our enterprise. It might be a time, if there's, say, for example, there's crime or some corruption in your community, maybe it's harder to find, the initiative in taking some kind of action in this at this time, or you might be dealing, with some, could be a crisis that might be derailing this energy to some degree. It might be harder to take initiative and some kind of leadership role if you're dealing, again, going back to some kind of crisis or adversity that you may be, facing during this time. And also guard against destructive anger at this time. Anger that can really be, do something where, if you get upset, or even something simple like punching a wall, or something that's not going to be constructive, that's going to cause more harm than good. If you got your natal Mars in Cancer, for example, and or the fourth house in your chart, this could be where a lot of anger may be directed at the home. It could be property in your home. Sometimes it may even be right at family members. Mars in Cancer is known to have, we can have contentious situations with home and family members. So in that example, and say you're at the time of this transit, time of this video, I'm sorry, transit Pluto is in Capricorn. So a number of people that have Mars in Cancer are experiencing the opposition at this time. So again, it's very important to try to be, have a little more control at this time. Again, Mars being in Cancer, of course, is in its fault and its worst placement by sign as far as Mars goes. But anyway, now another thing too is that Mars, anatomically speaking, is connected with the head, the skull, the face, and it might be a time where you need to be, really, I would say, be very cautious at this time. I mean, Pluto does govern death, and I'm not saying, everybody has this transit, I was going to be in some perilous state due to some reckless actions. But see, Pluto is about control, and it might be, you might have a harder time controlling actions at this time, and it could lead to doing something that might cause some kind of injury to the head, to the skull, to the face at this time. It could be, a situation too. I mean, when you look at Mars as well, Mars is also connected with accidents. And Pluto, is about control. It might be harder to control something like this at this time, like an accident, because like, say, for example, if you're driving and you get, some car slams into you, and you were doing everything right, you were staying in your lane, you were following all the parameters and regulations of the road. That's what I'm saying as far as the control issue goes. I mean, when Pluto is involved in adverse transit, I would say that it's harder to find power and find control over things at this time. And the thing about Mars is also connected with combat and confrontation. So you might be overly obsessed at this time with having some kind of confrontation, or it might be connected, with some kind of revenge at this time. Remember, Pluto is associated with vengeance and revenge. So you have to be careful you're not confronting somebody over something that maybe can be avoided, and you might face strong repercussions as a result of it. It may also be a time to also as well, Mars can be connected with physical injuries. And the thing is, like, something Pluto related, if you're doing something like that's very extreme, like extreme sports, for example, it could be a greater propensity to have a physical injury as a result of it. It might be, maybe it's obsessing over some issue, that leads to something where maybe you're not paying too much attention. If you're on the road, for example, and you're trying to locate somebody that maybe that you're suspicious of, or as you think is a criminal, and if sometimes if you become so obsessed with something, you might not be being overly cognizant of what's around you, and it could lead to an accident. And Mars is connected with accidents. Hold on a moment, people. Sorry about that, I'm back. But anyway, now another thing too, Mars is also associated with sports, and again, maybe it wouldn't be the best time for extreme sports. Maybe you don't have the energy for it. As an example, Pluto is extreme energy. It could also, remember that Pluto is also connected with trauma, so there could be a greater proclivity for some kind of injury or something that's traumatized during this time if you are involved in some kind of sports related activity, or even if you're doing something that requires a lot of physical energy. Say the natal Mars is in Capricorn and you're involved in construction. It might be a greater propensity to wind up getting injured, to have some kind of physical injury at this time. And actually, I mean, since Mars is connected with physical injury and Pluto is trauma, that could be very intensified during this time. So it's really very important in general, whatever you're doing, if there's any precautions you could take, if you're working out vigorously, wearing your right the gear that you need to wear, the wrist braces, whatever needs to be worn to minimize the chance of injury. This is really a critical time, I would say, to do so. Now, another way this transit may manifest, it could be where one becomes overly fixated, sometimes with sex at this time. If Mars is in Leo, as an example, natal Mars in Leo, it could be where you're, might be about, dominating in sexual matters, giving that impression of grandeur during your sexual interludes or what have you. You might also be and also could be sex might be very extravagant for those for many that have their Mars in Leo. Now also too, another way this transit may be expressed is that a crisis may challenge you in terms of taking action in some other part of your life. Now, let's say, for example, if the natal Mars is in Aquarius, it might be taking action connected with maybe electronic repair, or something with your computers that's gone awry, or maybe even a goal or aspiration at this time, as some examples. Now, again, reiterating what I said previously, it may be harder to control anger and also temper at this time. Going back to Mars in Cancer as an example, if the natal Mars is in Cancer, it could be anger that might be directed at family. It could be things in your home. Maybe there's possessions in your home. It's just a time to be careful as far as anger goes, because it could be harder to really control and suppress it at this time. Now, another thing too, is that also in going back to Cancer as well, it could also be getting angry due to criticism and ridicule, being overly sensitive to that. Now, this transit may also manifest in power struggles with a sexual partner. Say if the natal Mars is in Scorpio, it might be somebody that you're in a shared resources situation with. It could be over wills, as an example. Maybe there's an inheritance matter with an inheritance where there's an issue, where there's a contentious situation with a sexual partner. It could be a power struggle over these things at this time. Also too, surgery in some cases may make it harder to find the enthusiasm to do things. Now, If natal Mars is in Sagittarius, and maybe it's the enthusiasm connected with the outdoors, sports, advertising, publishing, as some examples. Let's say Pluto-related things in general might be difficult to find the energy and vitality to do at this time. If, say, for example, if transit Pluto is in the 11th house, it could be doing something with astrology or astronomy, with computers, matters with groups, clubs, organizations, or friends, as some examples. Anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.